I don't know. I wasn't going to do the second part of this, but or at least right away. I was going to wait to see what the response was like on the first one. But it felt good, man. It felt good getting back on the horse of the woke church rejection train. Anyway, but I wanted to do as part 2 to this. If you remember where we left off, I'm going to remind you. I'm going to play the last maybe 10 seconds of this. I had a thought about this, and it's just so interesting to me. It's very, very interesting to me the way he frames this to his advantage. Listen to what Bryan Lorrits has to say here.
I take to right the wrongs because that's my brother, that's my sister. So for anyone to look at the plight of African Americans historically and merely shrug their shoulders and say, not my problem, is a person who just doesn't get the spirit of the Gospels nor the New Testament.
So everyone's about to say, "Oh yeah, oh you know," everyone's like loving that that line, but that line is such a manipulation. Hear me, guys. That line is so manipulative because the way he's framing this is that if you're not for reparations, then essentially what you're doing is you're shrugging your shoulders and you're saying, the suffering of black people, that's not my problem. That's just not my problem. And he's framing it that way where it's like, you don't understand the gospel, you don't understand the New Testament, and you're just like, not my problem. And the reality is, I myself am against reparations, and I talk to many people who are against reparations, and the reality is that I have not spoken to one of them that have just said, don't care, Jimmy crack corn and I don't care. Yet that's how you're being framed here. You see, here's the reality, though. These people that are against reparations understand that the way to fix wrongs from the past is to stop the cycle of wrongdoing. You stop right there. The way to not do it is to create new victims. And what Bryan is about to do, he's about to go into this thing where it's about the government, not about individuals and stuff like that. And he's going to make that distinction, which again is a distinction I agree with, but that's actually the reason why I'm against reparations, because the government actually does not have the authority to do it. But you see, the thing is, the government doesn't have any money of its own. That's the thing that people that are against reparations realize, that the government isn't this magical entity that has access to its own money. The government has 2 ways to get money, right? Ready for this? There's 2 ways for the government to get money. They either tax people for it, so in other words, it's other people's money, or they create it out of thin air, which creates inflation, which is also a tax. It's basically a tax on future people. And so I'm either putting my own kids in debt to pay your reparations, Bryan, or I'm saying it's okay for other people to get taxed for it. And see, that's the thing. Reparations doesn't actually solve injustices. It just creates new victims and kicks the can down the road. The people that I know that are against reparations, they're not saying, not my problem, the way he's caricatured it here. What they're saying is the cycle of injustice has to stop somewhere, and here is where I want to stop it. It's just that simple. And so it's so manipulative to frame it that way, because what he's trying to make you think is that people that are against reparations, they're just these evil people that just don't care about the suffering of others. And I have to be honest with you, I'd probably be in line to get some of those reparations, and I am against them completely, because the reality is all it would do is create new victims. I'm willing to absorb whatever it is that you owe me, or whatever you people think are owed to me, whatever people think is owed to me through reparations. I'm willing to absorb that loss. I'm willing to absorb it because that's what a Christian ought to do. I don't want to create new victims to my benefit. That's the opposite of what I want to do. It's not because I don't care. It's not because I don't think it's my problem. It's not because it's none of that. It's that it would just create new victims. Plus, it's not biblical, which Bryan's admitted here, which is so bizarre and manipulative that he decided to go this route with how this all worked. Anyway, let's continue, and we'll go from there.
While the Bible gives us a framework for thinking through reparations, I think the best case for reparations is actually in our own Constitution and history.
This is so interesting. So he basically said it's hard to make the biblical case for reparations, but it does give you the framework, even as he said, now, I realize that it's not really reparations in the Bible. It's restitution. That Zacchaeus wasn't paying for other people's injustice. He was paying for his injustice. Like, he knows all the arguments, and yet he's still trying to pretend like he just made sort of a biblical case for reparations. He didn't. He made a great case for restitution. both for the justice system and for interpersonal relationships. I completely agree with that. Restitution is beautiful, biblical, holy, godly, all that. Reparations is very different. So let's hear this case that he's going to make with the U.S. Constitution for reparations. This ought to be interesting.
We are told in the Constitution that one of our inalienable rights is the pursuit of happiness. Black folks have been denied this for so long that we have settled for just being people who matter. Like saying Black Lives Matter is controversial, and we haven't even gotten to the constitutional part which says Black lives should be happy.
When I first heard that, I just couldn't believe how many errors somebody could fit into like one sentence. It's like, black people have been denied, like he quotes it correctly at first. He says the pursuit of happiness is an inalienable right, with what the document says. Then he says black people have been denied the pursuit of happiness for so long that it's controversial to say Black Lives Matter. It's actually not controversial to say Black Lives Matter. What's controversial about that is when you say all lives don't matter. That's racist to say that. And then also, Black Lives Matter is connected with a Marxist socialist organization. Then it becomes controversial because in order for me to affirm Black Lives Matter, I also have to affirm LGBT. I also have to affirm reparations. I also have to affirm communism and all this other stuff. We're not the ones who made it controversial. You know what I mean? Like if you said Black Lives Matter and I said, yeah, Black Lives Matter, just like white lives matter, just like Asian lives matter. If you didn't say anything, if you didn't call me a racist at that point, it wouldn't be controversial at all. But many people have decided that is controversial. They made it controversial. You made it controversial, woke church. That's not me. That's not on me. So don't create a controversy and then say it's my problem. That's your problem. Secondly, it's just So he quotes it correctly, the pursuit of happiness. Then he claims without evidence that black people are denied the pursuit of happiness right now. And then he said that the Constitution guarantees that black lives should be happy. That's not what it guarantees. That would be insane. The Constitution can't guarantee that your life will be happy. It guarantees that you have the opportunity to pursue happiness. And primarily the way it does that is it stays out of your way and doesn't rob you and doesn't screw you over and stuff like that. It limits what the government can do to you because the framers understood that oftentimes what makes your life miserable is government. You know what I mean? Oftentimes what makes your life miserable is government. And so it wanted to get the government out of the way to let you pursue what you wanted to pursue, but it didn't guarantee happiness. So he just made so many errors there, and they're small errors from a word perspective, but they make all the difference in the world. What is it that blacks can't pursue right now? Like what are they being denied pursuit of? And again, you got to remember, this is in the framework of a reparations conversation. So it's like, because I haven't given you cash, you can't pursue happiness? That's what you're telling me? I mean, again, I stand to collect some of this cash. I could make the case and draw my DNA. I would never give the government my DNA, obviously. They probably already have it. But I could give you, my African ancestry, all that stuff. I can get some of that cash. But like, I'm free to pursue happiness pretty much right now. There are some onerous government restrictions on me, and it makes my life a little bit more difficult than it should be. But I can pursue happiness right now. And see, this is the thing. Like, he just got done saying, well, Black Lives Matter is controversial. Yeah, it's controversial because Black Lives Matter wants to increase the amount of government in our lives, and that's going to make our lives much less opportunistic to pursue happiness. That was the whole point of that quotation. But no. He wants to twist it all up and say, well, black lives aren't happy, therefore the Constitution hasn't been fulfilled in their lives. It's just very weird, this argument. Let's continue and let him flesh it out a little bit. But I was very surprised that he could fit so many errors in like 10 words.
It's safe to say that African Americans have been denied the pursuit of happiness since day one in this country, which is our constitutional right.
See, this is what's so weaselly about this. It's like I could agree with him at the start of the country. So day one, yeah, he was right. But then, somewhere, I don't know, maybe 40, 30, 20 years ago at least, recently, they got that back. Lots of black people are pursuing happiness. And I was just looking at this company the other day that's in my field. And it's a black-owned company. It's a huge company, and they are doing so well right now. And it's like, that guy's pursuing happiness. You know what I mean? That guy's pursuing his dreams, right? And so, like, that's good. And you don't even need money to pursue happiness. Like, you can pursue happiness in all kinds of ways. And yet, Bryan's over here saying, as he stands in there with his designer clothing, everyone's fawning over him in evangelicalism. He somehow is like, well, I can't even pursue happiness. I don't get it. Like, what are you actually trying to say, Bryan, about money in terms of how you become happy? I'm not putting words into your mouth, but it just seems like a bizarre way to go for a Christian.
We can call history to bear witness that African Americans should have reparations. When I lived in the Bay...
Why? I know you say that, but why? You just got done telling me the Bible doesn't say that the government owes them reparations. The government doesn't have any money of its own. I didn't do anything to black people. So why would I pay? See, that's the other thing, too. Like, what's so twisted about this is that I would stand to collect reparations, but I would also have to pay reparations because I'm the one who makes the income that does the productive work that the government then takes, the production that I make, they then take it. They force me at gunpoint to give them money. I give them money, and then I'm the one who pays for reparations. So why am I owing reparations to, like, sort of myself, but then sort of other people as well? It just makes no sense at all. But he feels comfortable just saying, oh, yeah, history bears it. Of course they are owed reparations. Well, you got to prove that. And then also you have to make the biblical case that governments ought to be engaged in stuff like that. I think you can't do it. I can make a biblical case that definitively, at least in my opinion, says that they shouldn't be doing that. So that's where we're at. And so it ends up being just as vacuous as Eric Mason, even though he's slightly more careful about his words. It's just an assumption. It's just an assertion. You owe me reparations because that's loving your neighbor. Well, you got to prove it, though. And historically, you've got to prove it. I mean, I don't owe you anything. I know that I'm going to get some, but I'm also going to owe some. It's just weird.
Area, I was shocked to discover that the Fillmore, known at one time as the Harlem of the West for all of its African-American residents, was originally a Japanese community in San Francisco. Shortly after Pearl Harbor was bombed, Asian hysteria flooded the country, and ultimately over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were pulled from their homes and sent into internment camps. The Fillmore now was vacated and given to the rising population of African Americans. Just think of that. They just gave Japanese homes to black people. Some years later, our country acknowledged our wrong done to the Asians and paid out $1.6 billion to the Asian community in reparations. In 1946, our government established the Indian Claims Commission to hear grievances from Native Americans over lost territories seized by our government. Ultimately, the government paid out $1.3 million to tribes and bands. Yet for some reason, when blacks talk about reparations, it's all of a sudden controversial. It shouldn't be for many reasons. The primary one being our government actually began the process of reparations with African Americans. As the Civil War was ending, Union generals were having a conversation with the African American community in Savannah. Coming out of that discussion, it was decided to take the over 400,000 acres of land seized from the Confederates and give it out in 40-acre allotments. This became known as 40 acres and a mule. This was a stunning act, way ahead of its time. Sadly, not long after this order, President Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, overturned the order and returned the land back to its original treasonous owners, the very ones who declared war on their own country. Just think about the power and healing that could have come.
Yeah, you see, he makes it seem like it's like it just locked it up. There could have been power and healing and reconciliation. I wonder if he's ever spent even one moment on a Native American reservation. I mean, I really mean that, Bryan. Like, Have you spent even one moment on one of these places? That this is, I guess, this is the example of how to have reconciliation and healing and all this stuff. R.J. Rushdoony, he's one of the godfathers of Christian Reconstructionism. One of the things that drove him to taking the law of God seriously is the destitution and the desperate situation that he saw on Native American reservations due to the way that the government essentially, that's a controlled environment. And they were totally in destitution. It was not a good situation. And over here, Brian's like, well, could we get in on that? Like, do you want to get in on that? I honestly don't even understand why he would bring that up as something to like aspire to. It makes no sense to me at all. But I wonder, I mean, maybe he has spent time on these reservations. They're not great places. You know what I mean? Like, if that's your idea of healing, then I'm starting to understand a little bit more about why you're so wrong on some of this stuff. But anyway, let me end there. I'll continue. I have to jump, but I'll continue with this and talk a little bit more about that last section because I think that's important as well. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful. God bless.